Hello, this is Richard Smith from Harford Community College, and thank you for attending this Maryland Online webinar, Table Accessibility Do's and Don'ts. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker for the day, which is Debbie Dorsey. Debbie Dorsey is Associate Professor of Health at Harford Community College. Debbie is a Maryland Distance Learning Association board member, Quality Matters peer reviewer, and a 2020 NISOD Excellence Award recipient. So Debbie, I'm going to unshare this slide and then you're all ready to start sharing yourself.
All right, let's see here. I'll get my PowerPoint up and we will do a little test to see whether or not it is in fact working, because that is always the question. Okay, let's see here. We'll share and we'll go from the beginning. And I'm not sure why it did this little, uh, oh, let's go back.
But we can see the slide,
Oh,
so
no,
we're
I'm
good.
not sharing it yet. Let's see here.
We
Oh, you
see,
can.
we do see it already, Deb.
Oh, okay, good, 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 good. All right. And let me just get my bearings here because, like I said, whoop, let's bring that over. Um, when you don't use the software frequently, it takes a little bit of acclimation. But thank you for the introduction. I am Deborah Dorsey, and if you have been in my webinars before, I've said this before. I probably sound like a broken record, but I present because I'm a faculty. So I come from the faculty perspective. And even though I do that, if you're not faculty, if you're staff, if you're administration, it's still helpful, I think, to see how does faculty view this? What is our lens? So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my camera and we will get started with the presentation. Okay, so we're talking about tables today, and I think that this is probably a topic that a lot of people find confusing. And part of that is just much like a lot of accessibility, there are things that we've gotten accustomed to doing. And so it can be a little challenging for us to, sort of wrap our head around doing things in a different way. And what we're going to do is talk a little bit about common problems and then show how we really want to address these problems. Now, less often than before, I'm not really seeing people use tables for layouts. And by layout, I mean, how you want to have a picture next to text and that sort of thing. We definitely don't want to be using tables for layout purposes. We're going to talk about merged cells and complex table nesting. All of that will make better sense in a few seconds here. Non-data presentations, why they are not a good idea. We'll talk a little bit about header rows and when they're missing, what the problems are, and then we'll finish with some alt text. If you have questions while I go through this, please, please, please feel comfortable or fine interrupting me because I can always pause and answer questions. Okay, so when we look at these things right off the top of our head, we say, okay, why is accessibility important? Digital accessibility, and we often look at it through the lens of visually impaired people who rely on screen readers to understand our information. But I also want to point out that it's not just exclusively visually impaired students who have trouble with tables. Dyscalculia, I think I said it right, are people that have difficult time with patterns, and students with dyslexia can also have trouble tracking certain things in the table. We've got our nonverbal disorders that have visual spatial issues. We also have people with visual perception and motor disorders, and they have a really hard time tracking across the table as well as in copying the information. And then we have ADHD, and folks that have ADHD tend to focus on specific cells, especially if it's in a large table. It's data overload for them. And so we'll start off with an example of something that is non-numerical, but it's okay. And that is this plant um, table. And this makes sense because the information that is in the table is very simple. And so even though we don't really have numbers, which is what we normally will tell people, hey, this is what you need to reserve your tables for, this is an okay example of a table that is using more than just numbers. So I'm going to show you what is not okay, and hopefully it will work. Here we go. Let's see here. Are you able to see my Brightspace page?
Yes, Deb.
Okay, good. So this is a hot mess. And a lot of us use this because, in a sense, this is almost like trying to use a table for layout purposes. But hopefully, what you're seeing here is that we've got numbers in cells, we've got bullets in cells. And so this is not a good example of a table. When a screen reader will look at these, it'll go across the row and then it'll start jumping down and it'll say, oh, one, determine intensity. It just doesn't make sense. It also doesn't make sense to the person who's using the screen reader. They're going to be completely confused. But here's another good example of how someone with dyslexia or dyscalculia or ADHD, this is very difficult for them to track, or it's really overwhelming. So I'm going to show you a different version. It's not from the same course, but I think you'll understand why it's helpful. And this is, let's see if I can get in here to my student view. There we go. So this is taking something that we would normally put, we would probably think, oh, let's put this in table form. And it's not. It's using bullet points. It's using headers. So for example, module 3, that's header 1. Week 1 is heading 2. Week 1 and week 2 are headings 2. Right. So when the person is looking at this, when their screen reader is reading this, it makes sense. They can understand a hierarchy, and this is going to be much easier to track for those students who we talked about early on that are not just visually impaired. And you can see it follows the same pattern. Whenever I have folks in a webinar that is talking about a specific accessibility topic, I also like to kind of move in there and show some other things that are related to universal design for learning and other accessibility problems. And so this is a good example of that. When I use my course outline, you'll notice that when I go into my module, it looks very much the same. And that is creating that continuity between the two different areas. So for example, when the student comes into the course, they see this information. And then for every module, when they look at the schedule, it's going to be the same. So that consistency is part of universal design for learning. But I purposefully created a problem in this particular outline just so that I could show another thing that we often do that is just not a good idea. So as we scroll down, I'm sorry, that always makes people nauseous. You'll see I put previous modules at the end. And hopefully what you're noticing is that there is an issue with color contrast. And I bring this up because a lot of times we'll use this to distinguish between things that have already happened and things that are current. And you don't want to do that. You want to avoid using color, particularly color that does not meet the gradient requirements, and that you don't want to be using it to express a purpose or to show a distinguish between two different kinds of fonts. All right, so we have the first, which is not good. This is not a good table at all. And this is a reworking of a table that takes things that we would typically want to put or have traditionally put in table format and puts them into a format that uses headers and bullet points. So let's get back here. Already went over that. All right. Please, please, please. This is one that everybody wants to do. Stop using tables to describe due dates. Again, this is the one that we want to try to get towards, that we are utilizing this as showing or using our headers. With this one, I could have used bullet points as well. I could have put them up here. You don't have to. This still does organize things in a very clear pattern that makes sense to the learner. All right, let's talk about nesting. Big issue. We see this a lot in our math courses. And it's how we traditionally have arranged our data. So here is a good example. It's not that the table is a problem in terms of the proper use of tables, meaning it has data in it. The problem is you see that there are merging. So under group one, there are columns that are merged load, stress, pattern. And then there's an afternoon with, again, three different columns underneath. So a screen reader is going to lose track of the reading order here. And there's going to be major navigation problems if the table is incorrectly nested. And I guarantee you that most will be when we run tables through Adobe. If they're saved in a PDF and we run them through Adobe, Adobe automatically says, hey, there's a big problem with this. None of it's nested correctly. And if you have ever attempted to fix a PDF in Adobe, then you know that it is, you can do it, but is exceptionally tedious and frustrating and requires a certain amount of expert information that really, again, from a faculty perspective, exceeds really the scope of what we do, what our role is at our institution. And so this is something that we really want to start moving away from. So you can see grades, this is a hot mess. Under meets expectations, the column is broken into points, and then the description of the criteria or the level of achievement. And again, this is something that a lot of us probably would have done in the past. And you can also see right here that there's uneven column distributions, and that's totally going to show up when we look at it as a PDF. I feel like Adobe would say, just don't use this. They need to have an option when they give us the report that says, just say no. So we've got smashed together font. We've got merged cells. This is definitely a table we do not want to use. Excuse me. So usually your LMS is going to be a better option. Your native rubric tool will typically arrange the information in columns that make sense. And so you can see here's an example of that. There are no merged cells, and it does put the points, but then directly under it, it describes to the student, okay, well, how do I earn these 15 points? How do I earn these how do I earn these 30 points? So we want to move away from utilizing self-generated tables and giving that information to our LMS's native rubric tool. All right, so again, we're talking about merged cells. And you can see here that, again, this actually represents rows that are merged rather than columns, which we looked at before. And what it is trying to tell us is that there are two people that represent the teen category, and there are two people that represent the adult category. But this is a problem because screen readers are going to have an issue. Excuse me, I don't know why I'm losing my voice. It's going to have a difficult time reading across the rows. And if our first row is not set as a repeat rows, sometimes what that screen reader will do is completely repeat for a second time the entire table. Here is the screen reader friendly version of that. Instead of, go back here, instead of this being a collapsed row, you can see it's just repeated. And this is going to be really, really helpful to those people who utilize a screen reader because what it's going to do is read across and then it's going to start going through these in a way that makes sense to the learner. Okay, so I want to escape out of here for a second because I think I had some notes in here that I wanted to share with you. Okay, so again, right here with the merged cells, the problem is that it loses the context of the second row of each group. So if the top row again was not marked with those repeater rows, that's when it will again read the table twice. So when we look at alt text, and I'm going to keep this down like this because I want to show you what alt text should look like. When we have pages with multiple tables, the alt text that we want to use is the table title, the column headers, and a brief description of the main data trends. And so when we look at this, and remember that this is our corrected version of our merged cells that we initially said, nope, that's not good. When we look at this, what the alt text should say, get here, is and if it was titled, which I didn't put here for you, but the screen reader would first read the title of the table, and then we would want it to say the image shows a table listing race participants with 4 columns. It talks about what those 4 columns are, and it gives an information about how the data progresses across the table. And so that's what we want to use when we are creating alt text for our tables. One of the things that I have started to do, and I have entered into the world of using AI very cautiously, but I have started to put tables into things like ChatGPT or Copilot and say, please provide alt text for this table. And they do a pretty good job. In fact, when I put them in as an image of a table, they also are generating fairly good alt text for the image. It can look at it and go, yes, this is a table and this is how you would typically describe it. So whether or not I upload a table that is in a Word document and ask the AI to give me alt text for it, or I give the AI an image of the table, both they're doing a really good job at providing the alt text that I want. So one of the, I guess, really the conclusion of this, and then I'll open it up for any questions, is that we need to be mindful of why we're using tables. What is our purpose? Are we using it to convey data? Or are we using it to cram stuff together in this particular case? Let me go back. To cram stuff together to try to keep everything organized. And again, this is not what we want to do. This information is best put into a list format. The other thing that we want to think about is, and I like to remind everybody about this, I always am finding that I have to remind faculty about this, is that we need to do this regardless of whether or not we have accommodations for a student. Remember that those are 2 separate things entirely. If our digital information is accessible, it's probably going to be much easier. It's already meeting a student who has accommodations. It's already meeting them where they're at. But we know that a student does not need to tell us that they have a disability in order for us to be responsible for providing that digital information in an accessible format. Meaning, a student who has dyslexia, who doesn't seek out accommodations, doesn't have to tell me that they have dyslexia. I still have a responsibility for putting up the information in an accessible format. And going back to what we talked about originally, what that means is that that person with dyslexia probably wouldn't even have to tell me that they have this because I'm already meeting them where they're at. I'm already satisfying the needs that they have for understanding my table information. So that is what I have for you today. And I can go ahead and open it up for any questions that you might have. I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing. Hopefully, did I stop sharing? I think I did.
No, you're still sharing, Deb.
I'm still sharing. Okay, let's see here. You might have to go in and share yours in order for it to. Oh, there we go. Okay, we got it. All right. Does anybody have any questions for me? I find that tables are things that we really have to sort of get in there and start maneuvering around in. Are people familiar with how to create or to do repeater rows? Because I can also demonstrate that if you would like. So I'm going to go ahead and share again. And we'll do just a quick little table. Okay, so when I insert a table into Word, I'm going to put some information in there. The very first thing that I want to do is go in and select here, repeat header rows. And there are two reasons why that's important. One, it tells the screen reader to return to that top row and give that information to students. But it also means that if I keep my information up in a Word document or a PDF format, and I have multiple pages, that header is going to continue to follow onto this second page so that the person doesn't have to keep scrolling up and scrolling down in order to see, okay, what does this cell tell me? Super important that we do the repeat header rows when we are creating our tables. And again, if you go to table layout, it's right over here for you, repeat header rows. Okay. Questions?
There's nothing in the chat, Deb, so.
Okay. So I know Richard, you're going to put up the thing that people might need to take a screenshot of to show their professional development. I also like to always finish by saying that if you have questions, you can always email me. My email address is super simple. It's Dorsey, all one word, at harford.edu. And I like it when my colleagues send me emails about questions, about, just different things, because I think it helps us build our network of support that as we move forward into needing to meet this April deadline, we're all in this together, right? And so the more we can help each other out, I think the better off we will all be.
All right, thank you very much, Deb. And before we go, the certificate is up on the screen if you want to take a screenshot of that. And I do want to remind you there's one more accessibility webinar coming up on March 26th. It's called to PDF or not to PDF. Here's the answer. And also there should be some other certificates and potentially a badging that could come out if you attend one of these workshops. You'll be hearing about that later on. All right, that's it for today. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.